Hello and welcome to the second episode of this podcast about an environmental project that spans across the Caribbean. My name is Tom Gordon-Martin and this is Caring for the Caribbean Future. The short series is all about giving you a better understanding of the IWEco Project, an initiative that aims to address water, land, and biodiversity management in 10 Caribbean countries. I'm joined again by Donna Sue Spencer, who's worked on the project since 2018.
Hello, Tom. Nice to be with you again to explain another part of the project.
If you've not listened to episode 1, we thoroughly recommend you do. In it, we discussed the restoration of Nelson Spring on the island of Nevis. Plus, Donna and I spent some time to explain in more detail what the IWEco project is and how it works. This week, though, we go to the Caribbean's most southern island state of Trinidad and Tobago. And Donna, this is where you call home, right?
Yes, I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. I love the north coast of Trinidad, and the project we're going to look at in Trinidad and Tobago is in northeast Trinidad, and it's home.
And so what is the project this week we're going to talk about, and how does it differ from what we were discussing last week?
The project we're going to look at this week is looking at land degradation again, but this time we are going to think about how people are supported, or how people interact with it a little differently. In the case of Nelson Spring, we had a community which mobilized to rehabilitate and protect a resource which was very valuable to them, to the quality of their lives and to their culture. In this instance, we're going to look at quarries, former quarry lands, abandoned quarries or quarries which have been exhausted, and land which therefore has been left. And we look at how a community can interact with that to their benefit. So we're looking a bit more this week at sustainable livelihoods.
And this phrase, sustainable livelihoods, it's a important element within the IWEco project's more broader goals, right? It's one element that you and your team have focused on. Is that true?
Each one of the national projects addresses different issues at local level in terms of environmental degradation. In this instance, we look at how a community can participate in that rehabilitation, but gain skills in so doing that they can use to support themselves afterwards. And we do know that, for example, we may implement some very effective methods in rehabilitating this land, but that alone would not be enough. So yes, we try different methods, but the people element is important because we need to transform the way that people see quarries and help people to understand that these areas need to be given attention and rehabilitated once we finish taking what we need from them.
And listeners from last week will remember that we had Dr. Sahili, who was leading the project in St. Kitts and Nevis. Which character and which person is coordinating the project on the island of Trinidad and Tobago?
The executing agency in Trinidad is the Environmental Management Authority. And the National Project Coordinator is based at the Environmental Management Authority. Her name is Alicia Akwing. So she has been the person who has worked with I Am Movement and Trust for Sustainable Livelihoods, as well as with the Small Grants Program, as well as with the National Quarries Company Limited. The various partners worked with them to coordinate the activities that we see in this project.
So I get the feeling that the IWEco project, which spans, as we know, across 10 Caribbean countries, what it brings is a huge variety of feelings. Each program seems to have a different atmosphere, and as an onlooker, I get a different feeling from each one. How does the Trinidad and Tobago project to you stand out and step away from the others?
I think in the case of Trinidad, we have a physical problem which was well described in that we were looking at degraded quarry lands or former quarry lands. And yes, part of the project has been to use different methods to rehabilitate. And you'll hear about those methods from Alicia and the project principals. But what is different here and what is special here is that, yes, people from the surrounding community were mobilized to carry out the methods. They were taught over a period of 4 months in the classroom and then 12 months actually in the field, employing the methods. So they learned. And what we see in this project is some transformation in the way that these people themselves feel about the land. Some had no particular warmth towards the land before, but understand better now and have been quite proud of the results of their interventions. So what we've seen as a result of the training and the learning of skills, which, by the way, also can help them to earn a livelihood. So it has that value to them. But what we see is that they understand better the land and they care about it more. And in addition to being empowered because they can earn something.
And I guess a lasting effect, generational effect, is what we're looking for, what this project's looking for. It's not about cleaning up or restoring or protecting a part of the world for now, for this year, for this decade. It's about changing it forever. Is that right?
This project is really trying to introduce changes at many levels as possible. So here we're talking about the changes among this group that you're going to hear calls itself the Quarry Rehabilitation Champions, right? That alone says a lot that they see themselves this way. But in addition, at another level, a lot of the lessons learned and the successful methodologies would be documented to be applied in the wider regulations, which are being updated for quarry operators in Trinidad and Tobago. And that's where you begin to see a wider impact.
Shortly, we're going to go to my chat with the IWEco Project Coordinator for Trinidad and Tobago, Alicia Ackwing. But before we do, let's hear from the lead technical consultant for the project, Carlton Roberts. Unfortunately, we were unable to have an original conversation with Carlton, so these are his words on the project, which are taken from a previous interview.
As a result of the deforestation, we have loss of biodiversity, we have loss of arable land, we have flooding, we have air pollution, and all of these can have impacts on the social life of the people in the area. With the IWEco project, we are first replanting the land, putting forest trees into the land. In addition to putting forest trees, we are setting up what you call check dams in order to filter water that flows over the land. We are also putting in the vetiver grass, which would serve to hold bind the soil on the ground so that it would make it difficult for erosion to take place. And we have set up a nursery to produce plants for future planting. We were able to realize that we have done well environmentally, but the economic part of it must be realized. I'm now rethinking how we approach this project as a business that would bring sustainable livelihoods to these community members. One thing I want to say is that never underestimate the power of a community to do an intervention to solve an environmental problem, because we have proven that these community people, ordinary people, were able to be retooled, empowered, and they are ready to solve this major environmental problem of deforestation.
Hi, Alicia. How are you doing?
Hi, Tom. I'm good.
It's lovely to chat again.
I know. And yeah, with all these little. So, my name is Alicia Ackwing, and I'm the GEF-IWEco National Project Coordinator for Trinidad and Tobago.
So thanks for joining me, Alicia. My first question was, my understanding is that this project is really about the people that that form the team that have been working under Carlton Roberts. And I wanted to ask you firstly, what is the local population like near the quarry, and why was it so important to get them involved?
Well, the project, the geographical scope of the IWEco project here in Trinidad, it ranges from the Valencia to the Sangre Grande area. That's where the majority of sand and gravel mining occurs. And in the immediate vicinity of the project site, we have the Sangre Grande village. And one of the key things is that, a community can derail a project, or they can certainly support and garner that buy-in for the project. And because of the nature of sand and gravel mining here in Trinidad and the perceived negative environmental impacts, we thought that at the outset that we involve the community. And it's mainly agricultural and small businesses. A lot of the agriculture is like monocrop agriculture. And I think it's a sort of economically depressed area. So the main activity within that whole community would be quarrying, but there's a disconnect between, what happens on the quarry and extraction and, employment for members of the community, At the quarries, it's more higher level, I guess. You're looking at engineers, environmentalists, things along those lines. But in terms of having, entry level opportunities, it's more or less non-existent. And that's why we found the role of, rehabilitation champions as a good entry point for having the community persons involved in this project and to partner with the social and environmental responsibilities, corporate responsibilities of the quarries located there. And the main quarry that we operated in was the National Quarries Company Limited, which is a state quarry.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And how did you go about choosing these people?
Okay, so a lot of the champions that we call the community rehabilitation champions, a lot of them did not have any prior experience to what we are deemed nature-based solutions to quarry rehab or any sort of environmental awareness. And we just put an ad out in the newspaper. We had flyers in the community. We had someone go around with a bullhorn, driving through the different villages stating, well, please send in your applications to be part of this national project. And persons applied. And they were all interviewed, the ones that more or less had any kind of skill. And it was not, we realized that there was no prior knowledge to what quarry rehabilitation was all about. But what it was a sort of interest and a dedication and a commitment to making the environment a better place. And that was the main premise of, how we based the selection process for our champions. Like I said, we didn't turn anyone away based on their literacy status or, their gender or their ability. The fact that they were just willing and committed to be part of this process was what, was the main factor for their involvement.
Okay. So it was a really inclusive application process, as opposed to previously the way in which the quarries you explained was somewhat not necessarily inclusive of all the people in the local area.
Absolutely. And for instance, we had two differently able persons apply. And because of the nature of rehabilitation on quarries, which is, more manual. It's a physical job. You're out in a quarry, hot sun, dusty environment. We found a role for our two differently abled applicants where they participated in other aspects of the project where we had handicraft training and handicraft workshops, so they were included there. We had more senior persons apply, persons like over 60. And we included them. We have, 2 persons are in that age group on the actual team. Our youngest member was 18 years old, and that person, she was looking for something to do right out of high school. And she joined our group.
Cool. You've mentioned the name The Champions, or Your Champions. How did this name come about? From my understanding, it wasn't necessarily something that you and the organizers chose. It was more from the bottom up. Is that right?
Absolutely. This project is community-based and community-driven. And, the word champion, it's an empowering word. And that emerged from the training, that whole training program. So how do you want to see yourselves? How do you want the persons to perceive the work that you do? And that's how that name, Quarry Rehabilitation Champions, came up. And they felt really proud to be part of something good, giving back to the community, giving back to the environment, helping to solve an environmental issue that, many deemed to be, have a negative impact,
That's fantastic. We heard in a quote earlier, Cotton Roberts say, "We have done well environmentally." What are the on-the-ground environmental successes of the Champions' work?
Well, if you understand, strip mining or quarrying, a lot of the nutrients are removed from that area to get to the aggregate, to get to the sand and gravel. And oftentimes, the soil nutrients or the soil is not replaced. Unfortunately, the fact that, after 4 years in this project, we have complete vegetative cover, sometimes overgrown, if you can call it that, cover for what was once denuded and degraded land, that is testament to the interventions of, where our champs were able to reforest some of those areas. When we initially went onto the site, it was complete silence except for the sound of heavy machinery in the background. Now, 4 years later, we're actually hearing birds, we're seeing butterflies. We actually saw deer tracks, so that fauna is coming back slowly because, of what has been done by the champs. And the other thing too is that we had a lot of soil and water runoff due to severe gullying in some of these quarry pits. And the fact that we used the construction of live check dams, which used small timber from the surrounding forest to construct a sort of netting, a sort of barricade to stem this sort of water runoff and soil erosion, that helped improve the water quality and reduce the turbidity of, sand or gravel entering the surrounding water courses. They've also been reduced, dust pollution, because with the vegetative cover, the loose soil that would have been flying into the air is now grounded by this vegetative cover. Mm-hmm. The fact that we don't have that many mudslides, or when it floods, a deluge of mud going into these streets or villages, that's another benefit and a success that we've been seeing based on some of the interventions that we've taken so far.
And you just described clearly there some of the environmental changes. What about some of the human changes within the champions themselves? How have you watched them develop over this process?
My goodness. The testimony that you would hear from some of our champs is that, before they had no understanding or clue about the environment. And, one of our champions stating that, she was a tree killer, she hated trees. And the fact that they are now educating persons within their family and in their communities about the importance of, not cutting down a tree, leaving it. If you need to get the fruit from the tree, you pick the fruit, you don't cut down the entire tree. They've also encouraged other members of the community to plant. Some of these champions, even though they may not have formal training in environmental awareness or so, Some of them are small farmers, so they have this connection to the land and they understand the importance of giving back and putting in. They also feel empowered. It's a sense of belonging because we call them champions. It's a group and they're very tight knit. They support each other in all their efforts. So, for instance, and perhaps I'm just going into another question you may ask.
It's okay.
When we had the COVID shutdown in 2020 and we had to shut down field operations in April of 2020, we did not resume field operations until July. And I mean, the impact on our community-based nursery, where our champs had propagated, I would say roughly 8,000 to 10,000 seedlings. We suffered about 90% loss in that community nursery. And from day one, because of their experience as being, small farmers, some of them, this was community-led. They said, look, while we bring our community nursery back up and running, we can, plant some more crops, crops that they had from home. And that's what they spend their time doing. So that level of dedication and that transformation and love for giving back to the environment, I think it was admirable. And the fact that they did not see negative impacts of COVID or any setbacks under this project as a deterrent to them and what they wanted to achieve, I think that is testament to the level of dedication and that sort of ownership and love for what they do.
You talk about some of the challenges that you've overcome, particularly around the pandemic. Are there some clear lessons that you think you've learned that would be useful to other restoration projects going on elsewhere in the world?
It's important to take baby steps. We had a whole entire training program developed for our champions, and we went bit by bit, step by step. So first, it was the awareness of what quarry rehabilitation was all about. What are the various need-to-be techniques that we would use? And then they were introduced to the practical side of that training, which was, they actually went onto the project demonstration site and applied what they learned. The fact that you also have to not use technical jargon. So basically, when our champs went onto the field and they were doing what they were doing, and we used all the technical terminology or applied a term to what they were doing, they said, but we've done this already. We've done this in our small farms. We've done this in our community garden. And the fact that they sort of put that what they were doing into perspective, into a wider, bigger picture, I think that really empowered them. And they're now the ones who are actually driving the different phases and the progress of this project. The other thing too is, you have to select persons who are truly dedicated to your cause and what your project is all about. Like I said, some of our community members had no prior knowledge or any sort of formal environmental awareness, but the level of dedication is important. And that commitment, the fact that they're not doing it only for the money, but for the sense of belonging, for the sense of ownership, for the sense of, seeing that they're contributing to addressing a negative environmental issue. All of that is important when you're working on these community-based projects.
I see. And I guess a key learning too, that then Alicia, what are the next steps? Could you explain what happens now? And if anyone wants to keep up to date with it, what can they expect is going to happen in the future?
Well, the next steps are, the champions, the reason they're called champions is they're so dedicated to what they're doing. They're actually in the process of forming themselves and taking steps to register themselves into an NGO. And this is also coming out of some recent training that we just concluded, where they got some guidance on identifying nature-based livelihood opportunities for them. How do they monetize the skills and experiences that they've had and they've been exposed to under this project, So they're now actually leading the process to develop a proposal for funding for small-scale livelihood project, and they're looking at how they can expand their quarry rehab skills to the wider community. So, for example, they're looking at possibly applying their skills to landscaping, They're looking at expanding the community nursery, and several of our champions, they were exposed to vetiver handicraft, the making of vetiver handicraft. And 2 of our champions, I think they're currently looking at exploring how do they register themselves as handicraft makers and to market the products that they've made. So this is the next step, because in terms of the sustainability of that livelihoods component under this project, most projects have a finite timeline, and the national project is expected to wrap up in August of 2022. So we're putting steps in place to sort of have this incubation period where the project supports that transition into, next steps for our champions.
Okay, well, thank you so much for all your work, and best of luck with that process leading up to 2022. And thank you so much for speaking with me.
Great, thanks, Doc.
And I'm afraid that's the end of episode 2 of Caring for the Caribbean Future. A big thank you goes out to Alicia Ackwing and all the champions for their amazing work. It also brings to a close this short 2-episode series on the IWEco Project. If you want to find out more about the project and learn about what the initiative is doing on the other Caribbean islands, go to IWEco.org. That's spelt IWECO.org. But please don't go anywhere just yet. Closing this episode will be the beautiful voice of Auntie Marva. She's a member of the Champions and recorded this extempo dedicated to the group's work. For those who don't know, an extempo is a lyrically improvised form of calypso, practiced in parts of the Caribbean, including on the islands of Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, friends, we gather here today to tell of our journey along the way. Well, it started in September 2018 at the Church of the Nazarene. Mr. Carlton, he really do care. He always start the day with a morning prayer. Mr. Chin, that little Chinese, boy, he know how to stretch the money for we. La da 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 da. Santimani. Such as IWEco Aya movement, just to name a few. We truly thank God for all of you. Before this program, we couldn't identify one tree. Now we know locust, maho, sardine, mahogany. The tree consists of a crong and roots, you see. It produces fruit seed, oxygen in the air, that's free. The tree looks how it supports the crown. The roots anchor the tree upright in the ground. Da 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 da.